Merhaba from Istanbul, Turkey. My name is Jennifer Davis and I'm the U.S. Consul General in Istanbul. I serve here in Istanbul representing the United States in Turkey, and I've been a diplomat serving overseas and in Washington, including 2 tours working for the Secretary of State. Women have a vital role to play in diplomacy. We know, for example, that when women are part of organizations, those organizations tend to be more democratic, more open, and more ethical. And we know that when women are involved in peace negotiations, the peace process tends to last. I worked on the peace negotiations between the government of Colombia, for example, and the FARC. And women were not included in the beginning of that negotiation process. But as women became more involved, they looked at the effect of the war on the communities over the decades, and the peace that ultimately resulted from those conversations will be one that lasts. The U.S. Department of State has tried very hard to make our diplomatic corps look as much like our population as possible. So we have gone out of our way in the past decade or so to recruit more women diplomats. And now women represent 40% of our diplomatic corps, and almost a third of our ambassadors are women. Thank you so much for inviting me to share my experiences as a diplomat. I feel certain that if women are more involved in diplomacy, peace and mutual understanding are more possible.
It is my pleasure to address this World Congress of Consuls as Israel's first ever Minister for Social Equality. I strongly believe that women need to be in senior roles throughout government. Indeed, the inclusion of women in top positions on both the national and local level is key to opening the door to a sustainable peace, a view I know is shared by you all. We see how women have the power to make a real difference in the world we live in. It is an honor to be part of a society where we champion the empowerment of women and gender equality, where we have a woman, Golda Meir, who served as Prime Minister, a woman as the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court for the 3rd time now, women in other top business roles. Today, we have the highest number ever of women in our parliament, and about 25% of our lawmakers are women, but we still have more work to do. A strong and confident woman, president or prime minister in the next decade is something we should strive for. In our efforts towards peace and security, Israel believes that women are powerful agents of moderation, particularly in the face of extremism. As leaders and decision makers, we can be a stabilizing force. Especially in this region of the world, women are an untapped potential for more peaceful societies. As a mother, I want to be able to tell my daughters that they will never suffer from exclusion and gender discrimination in government or any position. I want to promise them that as they grow up, they will be free and no one will ever strip them of their rights because of their gender. This is the promise all women and all girls deserve, and it is our responsibility as leaders to make this commitment a reality. Thank you very much.
Diplomacy has long been considered to be one of the most prestigious and important professions in the world. However, even though half of the world's population consists of women, they have been heavily underrepresented in this field. Some studies have argued that there have been and still are numerous barriers that contribute to the underrepresentation of women in diplomacy. Others claim that women tend to be less willing to apply for these positions. Well, it is quite obvious that by promoting more women in prominent roles in government, diplomacy, and development, there will be greater productivity and enhanced economical growth, and further will help resolve the world's problems. When talking about the underrepresentation of women in diplomacy, we need to examine how is the absence of female diplomats represented as a problem? What is represented as the causes of that problem? And finally, what is represented as the solutions to that problem? There are many studies, discussions, and conferences talking about the problems. However, few are representing solutions. The Royal Academy of Science International Trust vision to address the problem of underrepresentation of women in diplomacy is based on training of individual women to improve skills needed to successfully carry out diplomacy, and also, to a lesser extent, training of organizations to enforce a gender mainstreaming approach. I am a woman in science, proudly said. I strongly believe that to bridge the world through peace, prosperity, and sustainable development, the world needs science and diplomacy. The big fact is, bridging the world without leaving anyone behind can be achieved through the power of women in science and diplomacy.
I'd like to wish you all success at the 12th World Conference of Consuls, which is being held in Brussels. I understand that one of your topics is the role of female diplomats, and therefore I will concentrate on that. Of course, just in many other professions, the core of the problem is gender inequality, and female diplomats have suffered from that for a very long period. Diplomacy is a profession and a career where, especially when you concentrate on negotiations, it's a give and take process. It can be a slow one and it can be a frustrating one. For years and years, throughout this process, we have seen that when there is a female diplomat involved, things seem to smooth down and pave the way for a better understanding. Probably the main reason is because women are better negotiators, they are more tolerant, they have a flair of creating a softer atmosphere. And as a Turkish diplomat in the Foreign Office for very many years, I have witnessed that a male professional can say no to his male colleague, while he will think twice before saying no to his female counterpart. Obviously, in the last 20 years, the number of female diplomats has increased to a great extent, and there's a better understanding of gender equality. I think if we all want a social welfare to dominate our world, then we have to make sure that gender equality is there. And thus, I would just like to end my words by saying that trust women and give them a better chance. Thank you.
As the first female ambassador of St. Kitts and Nevis to Cuba. In ages past, as we all know, traditional diplomacy was principally practiced by men. It was also common to equate a diplomat to a male. Such stereotype formed the basis of major impediments for women aspiring to enter the field of diplomacy and international relations. Additionally, gender discriminations are bolstered by the protracted power structures that feed into the myth and misconception that women are not capable of doing this job. Nonetheless, in recent decades, there have been incremental advances for women in diplomatic services. The participation of women in diplomacy has slowly transitioned into a more prominent and active role. The number of female diplomats heading missions is increasing. Female diplomats are very eminent, and our contribution to the diplomatic sphere is very substantial. In today's world, even though trends of modern diplomacy are favorable to the incorporation of more women in the diplomatic service, it is evident that many countries still find it challenging to have an equitable representation of males and females in the field.
There is still quite a distance to go, but I sincerely believe that women have achieved significant progress in diplomacy in the last few decades. I believe the next decade will see further strengthening of women's status in international diplomacy, and it will be a very good development for international relations and humanity. With women taking more prominent roles in government, diplomacy and development, I think a new era is upon us. It is hoped that the influence of women in these roles will help resolve the world's problems. Women Entrepreneurs Association of Turkey often engaged in negotiations and talks with public policymakers at national and international level. This requires deep diplomacy to get intended results. As the chairperson of KAGİDER, I often find myself and my colleagues at the table with some national and international public officials lobbying or negotiating for women empowerment. And in those moments, I feel the responsibility to be successful. I may not be in the government, but I engage in international relations, so I represent my country. I believe I can refer to myself as a public diplomat. As KAGİDER, we always base our solutions or proposals on facts, scientific data, and scientific methods. I can say our association is quite experienced in international relations and diplomacy. For instance, we were selected to chair the W20, Women 20, and undertake the secretariat of the engagement group throughout the Turkish presidency in 2015. In general perspective, it's a fact that women are strongly underrepresented in diplomacy as they are in many aspects of social, economics and political life. These facts puts a special responsibility on the shoulders of every woman leader to bring the female perspective into the play. We do bring point of view of the underrepresented gender as well as the additional qualities into diplomacy, which is very important and valuable. I think it is very important for us, women leaders in diplomacy, not to lose our perspective, woman perspective.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank you for your kind invitation to address the Women Diplomacy Committee of the World Federation of Consuls. It is my privilege to say a few words based on my experience at this important meeting. I would like to take this opportunity to stress that my country, Slovenia, is, as a responsible member of the international community, the part of all relevant international conventions and documents related to gender equality policy. Gender perspective, in its different aspects, is one of guiding policy lines of all executive governments of my country. It is an ongoing process and there are challenges ahead of us. The role of women in public life is one of them. So, what does it mean to be a woman leader in governmental relationships? Family responsibilities and challenges in reconciliation of family and work life are one of the main reasons that women are reluctant to decide to pursue their career on decision-making positions in business or politics. To be a woman leader in governmental relationships is a big challenge. My positions included also business trips as part of governmental and presidential delegations. My work was very demanding. I found it extremely challenging but interesting too. Representing the government of your country abroad is a privilege and a big responsibility. I was, as a woman, very well received in all countries where I served, within government, businesses, cultural circles, and the diplomatic community. I found it easy to make contacts or to develop partnerships and friendships. Differing of my male ambassador colleagues, I was involved in organizing charity events together with their wives. However, as a woman ambassador, I was in a remarkable minority among my male colleagues. This fact did not affect neither their attitude towards me and my colleagues, women ambassadors, neither the attitude of the host country representatives. It is worth to notice that there are more and more women not only involved in governmental affairs, but they are taking more and more active roles. It is encouraging that there is already a considerable number of women in diplomatic service, and the number of women ambassadors is growing.
My name is Kay Bass. I am the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Aviation in the government of St. Kitts and Nevis in the Caribbean. I have been the Permanent Secretary now for almost 3 years, and being in leadership has been a great experience. It has been an opportunity to mentor persons in the department and to serve as a role model. Although women began to assume public and political roles in the late 20th century, today women in leadership are very sparse, and it is for some persons a surprise when someone becomes a leader. Even though women form about, over 50%, half of the world's population, when it comes to the high echelons of leadership, we find that women are very few, even though a lot of them hold managerial positions. And so women in leadership today is somewhat challenging, and yet it can be a great advantage. Some of the challenges women face, I think, could be summed up in one quotation said by Charlotte Whitton: "Whatever women do, they must do twice as well as men to be thought half as good." Women in leadership in the future, it holds many promises. The outlook looks great. I think today, in the proliferation of human rights and women's rights, women are now coming forward, realizing what their rights are, and taking their rightful place in society. Democracy, more countries are pursuing democracy, and democracy requires universal participation, in spite of your race, creed, gender. So women, I think, in the future will continue to play a significant role in leadership, not only in their own communities, but in the world.